any CFO. I don't care, what age you are. I don't care where you are in your career. Just because you've gotten that, that nice chief title doesn't mean you're done learning.
Welcome back to another episode of Careers in Finance. I am thrilled today to be joined by Eric Mason, CFO at the City of Quincy. I recently had the pleasure of listening to Eric on a panel at a CFO Brew event, which was a fantastic event. And the second he opened his mouth, I knew I had to have him on the podcast. Number one, because he's doing so many cool things in his role, and his story of how he, his path to get to this role too is so unique and interesting. So Eric, thanks for joining us. Welcome.
Oh, Anna, thank you for having me on. I'm very excited as an avid listener of your show. I think it's kind of cool to be on here. And the CFO Brew Conference was great. They put together an excellent show. Not just because I'm not just saying that because I was a part of it.
No, they did. I thought so too. Well, thank you. So I'm going to dive right in, and I want to just first, as you know, on this podcast, I love to talk about people's origin stories and how they got started in finance. Did you know? Was this always the path that you saw for yourself? What did you study? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, no. The answer is no. I never saw myself in finance. I was speaking at the World Finance Forum maybe about a year ago, and I called myself the accidental CFO, and I still feel that way. So. I went to school for economics. I was very lucky to have some great professors and able to do research and get graduate with actually a publication as an undergrad. I went to I spent my early career doing market research, working in the public sector as an economic advisor, then an economist, then chief analyst. And I love being an economist. That's my favorite thing to do, and it's definitely been my passion. But life's very interesting. One of the coolest things about working in finance is that it's such a large field that there's room for everybody with different skill sets. I know brilliant finance people with bachelors of arts and fine arts, and I know some great analysts with BSs in math. So what happened with me is I had applied in February of 2020 to start my graduate education in applied economics. And then we all know what happened in March of 2020. And I'm sitting in my March 15th, 2020. I'll remember for the rest of my life. I'm in my kitchen in my house, and I get a call from the mayor. And how are you doing, boss? And he goes, okay. He goes, I just got off the phone with Charlie Baker, the governor of Massachusetts at the time. And the state's shutting down tomorrow. And I was working, and I still am working in municipal finance. So I'm thinking like, oh, awesome. I get to work from home. This is going to be great. Like, I get to do all my math by myself, sitting in a room. And he says the current CFO was, I believe he was transitioning to retirement anyways. And so he said, Eric, and I still bring this up to him all the time. He says, do you want to take over the CFO position until this blows over? Occasionally I'll bring up hey boss, is this blown over yet? Can I go back to being an economist? And I showed up to my first day being a CFO with one person in my office in the middle of the pandemic with nobody knew what was going to happen. It was certainly baptismal by fire, to say the least. And, 4 years later, I'm still here, and we've been able to do a lot of really cool things and be able to really grow in the role. I'll tell you, one of the best things about being thrown in that role when you're 26 is you're allowed to ask stupid questions, and some of the smartest answers come from the dumbest questions. I'll tell you that. But yeah, that's kind of how I got to, you and I having this conversation today.
I love it. What an incredible story. And what you said is exactly why I do this podcast, because there are so many paths into roles in finance. And I think people often don't realize that. And so many people find that path was accidental. I would say, half the guests I do on the show were accidental. And I think that's what's so exciting about the field of finance and what I love about it. So, and again, just even changing some of my misconceptions that I had many years ago. So thank you. And we definitely need to come to some of the cool things you've done since you've been there, because you're doing some really innovative things. But let's start with your first role when you graduated. Your first was it a finance role that you started with when you graduated?
Yeah, I mean, a little bit of mix of both. So I started as an economic advisor working for the city. So actually the first thing I ever got assigned was to analyze the finances of the Boston 2024 Olympic bid, which sounds crazy that we're in 2024 right now. That just, because that seems so far off when we were doing it. And simultaneously to that, I was also, there was a small startup called Data Block that I was working as the director of market research. And I know we talked a little bit about this in the pre-show. And So I was during the day, I was, working in government and working in, a process that's, government technology wise can be behind. I don't think I'm being outlandish saying that. And then at night, sitting on these calls with some of the smartest people I've ever met, talking about ways to apply to apply blockchain to data security. And it was a really crazy juxtaposition. It really was. It was like you going in to working on a place was using Excel for their budget, and then talking about best ways to handle warehousing services for large blockchain, so large blockchain chains. So it was yeah, it was definitely unique. But I would describe both those as fairly financial. Economics and finance are sister fields, but certainly on the doing market research, that's heavy finance. I think that's a lot of analysts don't realize just how heavy finance is involved in market research. Everything's finance in that.
Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned working in the public sector, which is, I think you're my first public sector career in finance interview. Tell us a little bit about what's different about that, or what's unique about working in the public sector?
Yeah, first off, just pure marketing plug right here. We need anybody who's thinking of working in the public sector. We need you. It's amazing. I was interviewed by the Wall Street Journal a couple months ago on this. There's just a huge, there's a huge gap in public finance, and I'll tell you, good benefits, good paying career. It's not what it was 30 years ago, 40 years ago. But working in the public sector is kind of cool. I used to think, I'd speak at the World Finance Forum. I'd speak at these different conferences, CFO, or speak to industry leaders like yourself. I used to think I had such a different perspective that public finance and private finance are different. And the more I've done this, and as I've learned and grown, especially over the last 3-4 years, we're not different. So, well, my job, I don't have a P&L, all right, but I do in a sense. Our job's the same. But if you're in the private sector, it's get the greatest return on every dollar. I had that same responsibility. But here, what we're trying to do is get the best return on every dollar, but for the constituency. Take every one of those tax dollars earned and get the most out of it. So we've been able to leverage federal funding and local funding to build a new special needs school. We built 3 new schools since I've started here. Our mayor's, I think, is 4th or 5th. And it's really about that maximization. I think that's really what it comes down to. I still have a basic financial statement. I still have to know GASB. I have to know GAAP. But at the end of the day, it's working in the public sector, very similar to the private sector, about that maximization. But I will say one very different thing is just the transparency that's needed. Most companies aren't out there walking, even shareholders through what every little number means. That's an obligation, and it's an obligation I love in my role. I'll get calls, probably get a call today from somebody, and they'll have their basic financial statements up, and they'll be asking me questions, and I love being that explainer. So I'd say it's a lot more openness than compared to the private sector. It's a lot more, focused on making sure the constituency understands where their dollar's going. But yeah, I mean, it's very similar to the private sector, but in some ways, it's uniquely different in a good way.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that struck me at the panel when you were speaking is just the way you approach it and the way you speak about it was quite innovative, I thought, and you're even just doing some innovative things. So why don't you share a little bit about, you do some fun things in your role, and you're working on some unique initiatives. I'd love to share a little bit about those.
Yeah, so the big one, I think it was the first time you and I met at CFO Brew. We had just received the funding from the first blockchain bond ever sold in the United States.
Incredible.
And it was, it was 9 months. It was a 9-month process to go through regulatory actions. Worked with JPM on their Onyx platform, which was excellent. But, Locklord and Hilltop, Oric, all the vendors that were Blockwise that were so instrumental in being able to do this. And it's funny, there's only been about 50 or so blockchain bond sales in the world. There's only been 2 that have been done, that were done prior in the public sector, and that was both the same place, which is Lugano, Switzerland. But it was such a unique opportunity, and it was funny. We sold $10 million in bonds, and that was for road and sidewalk improvements, so kind of old school government stuff you do, improve roads, schools, all that stuff. And I was, it's funny. I was speaking on this one time, and somebody said, "Well, why were you the first? Why were we the first? Why was public sector the first to do it?" And this is where, as much as I, have tried to grow into my CFO role, I really can never remove that economist hat. And I gave the boringest answer in the world. I said, aligned incentives. I go, there's huge incentives for the private sector to do this, and they'll get there. They'll do it, the security of it, the underwriting reduction costs, all that. But in government, we have a unique opportunity here, which is we can democratize debt. So our goal, and it didn't happen with the first sale because it's the first step to climb Mount Everest on here, is that, and this is like serving the shareholders, except we have constituency. Our long-term goal is that we're building a new elementary school. We want that guy to be able to drop off their kid in front of, at school and look down at their phone and see an interest-free debt payment from the bond that built that school. I get $24 million in interest I pay every year in my debt portfolio. It's not a bad thing, but it goes to these large funds. It goes to BlackRock. It goes to Fidelity. It goes to whoever holds public debt. Every other thing I do in the city, every other check I sign has a local preference. So why not have bonding have a local preference? Why not let the local individuals paying this back have preference and be able to get that tax-free income? And blockchain lowers that barrier of entry so low that we think we'll be able to get there fairly soon. And I do very much like the idea of democratizing debt. Let more people just participate in it more. Let's get more people involved in this.
Incredible. I love it. That's amazing. So how does something like that get on your radar? Did somebody come to you? Are you thinking about just give it like that? How did that happen?
Yeah. So it's definitely something, obviously going all the way back to data block, that, I'm always interested in there. I always say I'm a very weird guy. Like, I don't like crypto, but I love blockchain. Like, I love new technology. And our current city council president at the time, the chairman of the finance committee, Ann Kane, he called me up, and he knows this world pretty much better than anybody else I ever talked to. Calls me up, and it's I think for some reason, I think we had the day off, and I go over to his office, and that's classic Ann. Like, he's a worker. He really is. Calls me up, I go meet with him, and he shows me this article from Lugano, Switzerland. Now, his company also hosts Blockchain Week, Boston Blockchain Week up here. So he has a lot of connections on this stuff, and he called me up and said, hey, look what this company did. Look what this city did, because he also had the Siemens deal. Hey, can we do this? And I'm not one of those people who says no. Like, I say no. The only time I like to say no is when it's a regulatory issue. Otherwise, I hate saying no to any form of innovation. So I said, I don't know. I actually said that to him. I was like, I don't know, but we're going to give it a shot. When I brought it up to my bond counsel, my underwriters, and they were a great team because they were like, there's not a no here. And then eventually JP Morgan came on and they went through the regulatory process. But it was a combined effort and then shaping what this was going to look like. But I'd say the big turning point to this is that when we brought it to the mayor and we kind of explained that democratization of debt, now we can better serve the public, and creates a safer bond. It's much safer if it's on a blockchain. That's where we really got that and the necessary political juice to really push this through. And basically, what long story short, what he focused on it was that it created a better product for the public. It created a better situation. And it started the step towards being able to democratize and open up the city's debt to the average person. And that's one of my favorite things about government, especially local government, because local government's very different than state and federal, is that we all have different policy objectives. We all have different financial objectives, but we all serve one group. That's constituency. And to see one person like the benefit of it because of the innovation, one person like the benefit of it because of cybersecurity, and the most important person on this, the mayor, like it because it's clearly a tool to better serve the public. And we can all get together, even though we have all different perspectives, and push forward. I mean, it was a stressful journey, but it was quite fun.
Love it. It's incredible. And I know it'll inspire some listeners who are listening just to be thinking too about, number one, being innovative and not being afraid, but also coming from a place of yes, which many CFOs I talk to describe their role that way, where so many, I think, on the outside think their job is to say no, but the true role is to come from this place of yes and find the paths forward, right?
Yeah. I would say that a big part of my job is being a cheerleader.
Yeah.
Understanding departments and trying to advocate for them.
Yeah. So you got thrown in to this role, and what a fast progression. Have you just kind of learned it on the job? How much from your education were you able to pull forward? Is it just being in it and getting your fingers on the keyboard, so to speak, or kind of how did you level yourself up as you were progressing?
Yeah, I mean, one, never being scared to ask a dumb question to an expert. That's definitely what I'd always recommend.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I had built the previous 4 or 5 years worth of budgets. I had been heavily involved in the tax rate, which are your two biggest things. So I knew those basics when the opportunity arose, and being able to leverage that baseline knowledge, like having that foundational understanding, can be quite beneficial. So I was able to leverage that. But I fell back on I'm going to be honest with you, I fell back on my fundamentals. And when you have 26, you don't have that many fundamentals to know. Which is research. I'm a researcher. That's my thing. I would say one of my biggest positive traits I have, and I think a lot of people get into economics and people get into analytical finance, is that we like to research. We can fall into the weeds, and that's what I did. I actually that was right when CARES Act came out, and that was 1,200 pages, and I sat down and read it. And I have a picture on my LinkedIn of my cat sitting on a giant stack of paper as I'm reading through it, because I basically said this. I said, nobody's an expert on CARES Act. The last pandemic was 100 years ago. Nobody's an expert on this. So nobody's going to be an expert. So I'm going to read everything I can. I read ARPA. I read the Biden infrastructure bill. I fell back on what got me into economics, is being a data dog. I'm going to absorb as much information because we're in an information game. That's all CFOs are. It's an information game. And I said, there's as much information that I can pull over to my side. That's going to help me. And I've always had a very good working relationship with our auditor, Mark, but formerly Powers and Sullivan. And I called up Jim Powers, who was the principal of Powers and Sullivan. And he had worked with me for years before. He taught me how to do the tax rate recap, which is like how we generate most of our revenue. He had taught me how to build the budgets, and I was never scared to ask him a dumb question. I'm sure Jim would have a litany of hilarious examples of stuff I asked him. But once I that's the best thing when you're young and you fall into the role, is that you can throw away your pride. And that's what I did. I kind of you have to humble yourself. There's people smarter who know better. I was replacing a CFO who was one of the youngest treasurers in state history, who had an MBA, was an amazing CFO. And so to go from like an MBA from Babson, and to go from being a state treasurer to some kid who went to school in West Virginia who can build you a hell of a model, knows how to program R, but he took 2 accounting courses in his life. But that's what I did. I relied on experts, and I managed, and like my big thing was managing and trying maturing those relationships, and it worked. I wouldn't recommend the course to anybody. Don't try and take over during a pandemic. A little bit learned on the job, being cautious, and I certainly feel much more inclined. That's why we were able to do more innovative things. I feel much more inclined now. But it's also understanding that any CFO, I don't care what age you are, I don't care where you are in your career, just because you've gotten that that nice chief title doesn't mean you're done learning. I think that's where people rot on the vine is a term I hear a lot, and that's my biggest fear. Like, I always want to be rejuvenized, and the best way to be rejuvenized is to be humble and know there's people smarter than you. There's a lot of people smarter than me. I can guarantee that.
Yeah, and some of them. I think the most successful people are lifelong learners and curious, right? Yeah. So, what advice would you give to somebody that wanted to follow, a similar kind of career path?
Yeah, it's all build the tool chest. All right, you don't know what tool you're going to need. You don't know if you're going to need a ratchet or a hammer or a screwdriver, but it's about having the tool available when you need it. I didn't know what tools I would need when I became a CFO, because I never would have projected a pandemic would happen. I kind of had, in my career, based on where I was, the idea of becoming a CFO was something that I thought of, but I thought it was, much further in the future. And I thought there'd be a transition phase. But building up that tool chest, never be scared to learn a new skill, and because you never know when you're going to need it. I'm an R programmer, so like I enjoy that syntax, but I also learned SQL because I know ERPs are mostly SQL based. Doesn't mean I have to be an expert in SQL, but because I can sit in this chair and talk to analysts in their language, that makes me more effective. It makes them more effective as analysts. So building that tool chest, learning a skill just to help with your job is great, but adding on new skills, even that you may not need now, it's just an investment in your future. It's the best return. And I'll give you one of so when I took over this, when I first started working, I graduated college, I asked one of my cousins who's been a very, very successful career, and I just said, hey, give me some advice. What would you tell somebody? He said, he goes, work as if your boss has to rehire you every single day. Which I thought was an excellent point. Okay. I think that's a little bit why I'm here. And the second one's kind of cool. He goes, you can be the smartest person in the room, but grind is the number one thing. He goes, a lot of people stop, not because they don't have the intelligence to do it. It's because they lose the drive. He goes, grinding is the best way for success. So I think it worked out. I feel pretty good.
Well, Well, and really good advice, because I think that it's so easy to get into a role, know the role, like just living it, and you get a little complacent. So thinking I need to get rehired every day keeps that fire in you, right?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
remember like I was never. I was an econ grad. Like I did a lot of data and stuff like that, but I remember getting my first basic financial statements, and I read through them. I remember getting my first offertory statement for a debt, like 350 pages, and just read through it.
Yeah.
It sounds so goofy. Like how much did I really understand at 21, 22 years old? What's in a basic financial statement? I'll tell you, very, very little. But what it told me is stuff I didn't know. So when I talked to my auditor, I was like, what does this page mean? He run me through exactly what it means. And it's like, wow, I just have that for the rest of my life. Like that's so valuable. It's an extremely valuable thing to have.
It is. You're absorbing it sometimes too, and you don't even realize it.
Exactly.
Well, I'm going to give you one that we didn't talk about. Just I have to, because I can tell you just love, public service and what you're doing. Give us a little pitch on Quincy. What's it like? Tell us.
So I'm born and raised in Quincy.
It's amazing.
Funny. I joke I had 2 jobs in my life, both on Hancock Street, which is the main street in Quincy. I pumped gas at my parents' gas station mechanic shop, and this job at City Hall. It's very funny. I relive this every day because my wife is from West Virginia, and she always jokes with me. She's like, "You think Quincy's the greatest city to ever exist?" I was like, "Because it is." It's no, I mean it's draped in history. We have the only place you can go and see where a founding father lived. We got John Adams and John Quincy Adams, the presidential estates here. Right over my shoulder, this cemetery. This is where John Hancock's dad's buried. John Hancock's from Quincy also. One of the oldest English-speaking cemeteries in the United States. Across a promenade in front of City Hall, you go see where Abigail and John Adams and Maria and John Quincy Adams are buried. You can touch real history, but it's so much more than that. I mean, it's a beautiful coastline. We have the Blue Hills. If you like recreation, you can do recreation. If you love history, like somebody like me, it's amazing. I mean, I remember, probably I'll incriminate myself as a child playing baseball in the front of a house that one of the Adamses lived in, and a baseball going through the window. And I go, places are you live in that much history? But yeah, so it's great history. It's a great food scene now. We have a very large Asian American population that immigrated over here and brought all their amazing food. So if you like that, some of the best sushi restaurants probably on the East Coast. We have an Albanian steakhouse that's unbelievable. So if you like history, you like food like me, it's hard not to love Quincy. And then, if you love recreation, we take a lot of pride in our parks. It's it's definitely a unique and beautiful place. It's not just the history. That's just a big add-on.
I love it. Thank you. And thanks for being a guest. I was so excited to bring your story to the podcast and really appreciate it. And I can guarantee you, anytime I see your name pop up at a speaking engagement, I will be in the audience. I love it.
Anna, thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Eric. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. FinPod is brought to you by Corporate Finance Institute, the #1 rated online provider of finance and banking training, certifications, and productivity tools.